Hi, I'm Gordon from Camera Labs, and this is the Mini EVO, the latest instant camera from Fujifilm to use the enormously popular INSTAX Mini format. Announced in early 2022 and costing around $200 or £175, the Mini EVO is a digital camera with a screen on the back to compose, apply effects and review your images. Photos are stored in internal memory or on a micro SD card, and unlike the fully analog Instax cameras, it's up to you which, if any, images you subsequently print and when you do it, so there's no waste and no surprises. The Mini EVO can also be used as a wireless printer, letting you make instant prints of any image you have on your smartphone. It does this via Bluetooth using the INSTAX Mini EVO app, available for iOS and Android phones, so no printing from computers, only phones. If the Mini EVO concept sounds familiar, you're not going mad. The proposition of a digital camera with a built-in instant printer has been explored several times by Fujifilm, from the square format SQ10 and 20 to the more recent LiPlay, with which the EVO has most in common. The LiPlay costs around $40 or £25 less than the EVO and employs the same sensor, the same equivalent lens, exposure range, internal memory, battery, and like the EVO can also be used as a standalone digital camera, an instant camera, or a Bluetooth instant printer. So what do you get for the extra cash? The newer Mini EVO has a larger screen, a more vintage look, higher resolution printing, and a lot more photo effects. Where the previous LiPlay offered 6 internal filters, the EVO boasts 10 lens effects and 10 film effects, and that totals 100 possible combinations. So in my review, I'm going to show you how it all works, and also how it compares to Fujifilm's simpler analog models, as well as their standalone instant printers. Which is going to be best for you? Let's find out. Design-wise, Fujifilm's thrown its full retro aesthetic to the Mini EVO, which to me looks like a cross between the Mini 40 and an X100V, even down to the details like the logo on the front. In terms of build and finish though, it's unsurprisingly closer to the Mini 40, so that's textured plastic around the body, not rubber. Size-wise, it's roughly the same height as the Mini 40, seen here on the right, but narrower and comfortably thinner too, making it much more bag-friendly and more likely to slip into a large pocket. Also note the fully analog Instax cameras need to extend their lenses for operation, whereas the digital Mini EVO remains the same size. In fact, the EVO is roughly similar in size overall to the Mini Link printer, which makes sense since that's basically what's driving the printing process inside. Speaking of which, the EVO takes Instax mini cartridges which load into a large compartment accessed from the rear. Cartridges contain 10 prints, each containing the chemicals required to develop the picture. Fujifilm normally sells mini cartridges in twin packs for around $15 or pounds, so that works out at around 75 cents or pence per print. But of course, unlike an analog Instax camera, the EVO lets you choose which photos will be printed. Instax mini prints are roughly the size of business cards, with the actual picture measuring 2.4 by 1.8 inches, or 62 by 48 mm, and leaving a border around the edges that's a little thicker on one side for writing a note or a caption. Fujifilm sells cartridges with different border effects, with the latest one being stone grey. Now back to the camera, and a quick note on orientation. The Mini EVO may have some design cues that suggest it should primarily be held horizontally, but once you start using it, you realise it's actually meant to be held vertically most of the time. The strap lugs and print slot at the top, the tripod thread at the bottom, a nice bonus by the way for any instant camera, and most of all the screen user interface and controls on the back. They all encourage you to shoot vertically and make tall shaped prints where the thickest border is going to end up at the bottom, not uncomfortably to one side. Of course you can still shoot in the landscape or horizontal orientation, but for me, Instax Mini works best as a vertical shape. In terms of controls, there's a power dial and shutter release button on the front in roughly similar positions to the analog Instax Minis. You'll also notice a built-in LED flash above the shutter and a selfie mirror below it, but no window for an optical viewfinder. On the Mini EVO, composition is with the screen alone. The lens captures a 28mm equivalent field of view, so that's a bit wider than the analog Minis, with an f2 aperture and a closest focusing distance of 10cm when set to the macro mode. Meanwhile, a ring around the lens turns with satisfyingly clicky feedback to adjust the various lens effects. Behind the lens is a 5-megapixel sensor which captures JPEG images with 2560 by 1920 pixels. Now that doesn't sound like much in 2022, but it's actually way more than you need to make an Instax Mini print, even with the EVO's boosted printer resolution. In fact, there's pixels to spare to make mild digital enlargements, although equally, don't kid yourself that the images you'll be capturing will be any better than a modest phone, at least in pure quality terms. The camera is fully automatic, but has access to exposures from 1/4 of a second to 1/8,000th of a second, as well as having adjustable sensitivity from 100 to 1600 ISO, so a far broader range of conditions than an analog mini can handle. On the side of the camera, or the top if you're holding it horizontally, are a selection of unlabeled buttons and dials. First, a clicky thumb wheel for adjusting the film effects, followed by a cold shoe for mounting accessories, a tiny button to reset the lens and film effects both back to normal, a second shutter release, and what looks and feels like an old school sprung film advance lever, which is used here to instruct the camera to make a print of whatever's on the screen. On the opposite side, behind a small discrete flap, are a factory reset button, a micro USB port for charging only, not for data transfer, and a micro SD slot for expansion. Fujifilm supplies a USB cable, but you'll need your own mains adapter for it. The Mini EVO is powered by a built-in lithium-ion battery that charges in a couple of hours, and in theory should be good for around 100 prints or around 10 cartridges, but the actual life will greatly vary depending on how much you use the screen and Bluetooth. I burned through mine after just a day's worth of digital photography only. There's enough built-in memory for around 45 pictures, but with the EVO's files measuring around 1 MB each, you're going to be squeezing thousands of them onto a typical micro SD card. Okay, now for the real action around the back of the camera, where you'll find a 3-inch screen and a selection of buttons to navigate the upright user interface. And for me, this is where the EVO really starts to score, not just over an analog Instax or the LiPlay, but also a phone connected to an instant printer. Sure, you can download a wealth of camera apps and effects for your phone, but Fujifilm's interface is clear with fun options, and the EVO's ready to print them without the need to connect it to anything. The EVO may employ auto exposures, but there's way more control on offer here than most instant cameras. Pushing the rocker left and right lets you adjust the exposure compensation or the brightness of the image. Set a 2 or 10-second self-timer, and remember that handy tripod thread too. Set the flash on, off, or to auto. Switch the lens between close-up macro or normal distances, and even choose between 6 manual white balance settings or auto white balance. Pushing the rocker up and down adjusts a basic digital zoom. As I mentioned earlier, the sensor has enough spare pixels to support a mild crop or zooming effect, but as you digitally zoom further, do expect the image to degrade. Here on the left is a picture taken with the standard coverage of the lens, and on the right one with the digital zoom all the way in, and if you look closely you can see the one on the right does get closer and show some more details, but there is definitely a loss of quality overall. Pushing the back button toggles a status screen showing the time, date, battery life, Bluetooth status, and the current lens, film and exposure settings. You'll also see how many shots remaining in the memory, or memory card if you have one fitted. I've got room for over 25,000 more photos on my SD card, and an indicator of the prints remaining in a loaded cartridge, in this case 7 pictures. This figure is also represented by dots on the main screen when you're shooting. The real fun starts though when you turn those 2 control dials, starting with the 10 film effects: normal, vivid, pale, canvas, monochrome, sepia, yellow, red or blue tints, and finally retro. Meanwhile, from the lens control ring you can choose normal, vignette, soft focus, blur, fisheye, color shift, light leak, mirror, double exposure and half frame. Now these are all digital effects, so light leak will always overlay the same coloured streaks on the side of the image, and fisheye just distorts everything into a circle. For me, the best lens effects are mirror, which halves the live composition area and mirrors it on the other half for a really fun effect. Meanwhile, half frame lets you take 2 different photos and record them onto the same final image. Double exposure also works well, displaying the first image on the screen as you compose the second one over it. Note that the effects are applied at capture and are non-reversible, so they'll be baked into your JPEG image forever. Maybe it would have been useful for the camera to keep a plain copy of every photo just in case you overdo the effects, or allow you to apply different effects after the event in playback. As it stands though, you can only crop the image in playback. Perhaps mercifully, you can also only have 1 lens effect and or 1 film effect at a time, but that still totals 100 possible combinations to play with. Almost inevitably, I found myself mostly combining a vignette with one of the vintage film effects for that retro look that I love on instant photos. If there's a combination that you often go for, you can also register it as a favourite using the plus button, and if you just want to quickly set both effect dials back to normal, simply press the small button on the side of the camera. During playback, you can push the back button to display the shooting details to remind yourself of any filter effects that you applied, while pressing the play button toggles between a full view and 4 or 9 smaller thumbnails. Once you see a picture you'd like to print, you simply twist the satisfyingly clicky lever. As the image is prepared, there's a fun animation showing the image scrolling upwards just about in time with the actual print physically emerging from the slot at the top. Like all Instax processes, the image will gradually fade into view in about a minute and a half, but during this time there's no need to protect it from light or to shake it. If you want to use the actual digital images on another device, simply remove the microSD card and pop it into an optional USB card reader. If you've been recording images using the internal memory, you'll first need to copy them onto a microSD using the playback menus. An alternative way to access certain images or use the camera as a wireless printer is to connect it to your phone over Bluetooth using the INSTAX Mini EVO app for iOS or Android. The app has 3 main sections. The first, Direct Print, allows you to choose any image on your phone, perform some basic edits if desired, then wirelessly send it to the camera for printing. Like other Instax printers, this means you can enjoy instant prints taken with any camera, as long as they're accessible on your phone. Long exposures, night landscapes, super telephotos, all possible. The second option is remote shooting, which can send a live image from the camera to your phone's screen, where you can view it and trigger the exposure remotely. Since this is happening over a modest Bluetooth link though, there is going to be some lag and the maximum distance is only going to be a few meters, but it really does work and it allows more accurate, not to mention distant selfies or group shots than using the mirror on the front of the camera to compose the picture. Pretty handy really. The third option is transferred images, which lets you copy images from the camera into your phone for sharing or storage. There is, however, a catch. The app will only let you copy images that have already been printed. These are selected using the Printed Image Transfer option in the camera's playback menus. Unfortunately, you can't freely access the SD card or internal memory via the app to copy any image you like, and there's no cabled access with the camera's USB port either. This is obviously to encourage printing, but it is an annoying limitation. If you simply want to share or store your unprinted digital images, you'll need to remove the SD card and pop it into a card reader instead. And again, if you've been using the internal memory, you'll first need to copy those images onto an SD card using the playback menus. Awkward, but not impossible. Okay, so let's have a look at some images, and to reflect the hybrid nature of the Mini EVO, I'm going to show you some digital images on the left hand side, which I've copied straight from the SD card, alongside the versions printed by the camera on the right. Viewed as a digital camera alone, there's not much to get excited about here. The images from the Mini EVO are inevitably fairly low resolution at just 5 megapixels, and there's not much dynamic range to speak of either, with either the sensor, processing or both resulting in some washed out highlights and noisy shadow areas. They're okay for basic sharing, but a modern phone will outperform them, and I've got 2 examples which illustrate that. So on the left is a digital image from the Mini EVO without any effects, and on the right one from the standard camera in my Galaxy S20 taken from the same position at the same time. Now the phone photo is a tad wider, but you can easily see it resolving much finer details than the EVO version, especially in the railings on the building. Meanwhile, notice how the sky is blown out at the top and that the undersides of the balconies are noisy on the EVO compared to the cleaner version from the phone. Here's my second example of Brighton Pier, again with the EVO version without any effects on the left, and my standard Galaxy S20 phone camera on the right, taken moments later. Again, there's notably more detail from the phone version, especially when you start to look closely, and the EVO version is again suffering from blown highlights, losing tonal details on the side of the pier buildings. I also wanted to compare the printed quality direct from the camera on the left, and using it as a wireless printer for the phone image on the right. Fujifilm specs describe the Mini EVO as having double the vertical printing resolution when outputting its own photos versus when it's used as a wireless printer, but here the phone print on the right is showing way more fine detail, again in the railings in particular. Maybe the camera does have a high resolution printer inside, but we're not seeing the benefit here due to maybe the lens, the sensor and or the processing. The bottom line is the picture printed wirelessly from the phone on the right is just more detailed. And here's the prints of the pier photo, with the EVO's internal image on the left and the phone's wirelessly printed image on the right, and again there's noticeable differences in not just the resolution but the tonal range and the colour. Of course, the phone image on the right is also exploiting all manner of processing effects and technologies that the EVO lacks, and eagle-eyed viewers may have already noticed evidence of at least 2 exposures being used here, with a ghostly double of some seagulls giving the game away. But ultimately, as a digital camera, the Mini EVO just cannot compete against a modern phone in pure quality terms, whether you're viewing the files on screen or printing them out. At this point, you may assume the most sensible choice is to either buy a wireless printer if you only want prints from your phone, or to go for a much cheaper analog Mini if you want the fun and often surprising aspect of instant photography. But while both are solid choices for some people, it would be missing the core premise and the point of the Mini EVO, and that's the user interface with a fun effect and enjoyable controls, with the bonus of wireless phone printing or remote control if you desire. And when browsing through the prints produced by the camera, I personally think they look really good, successfully capturing much of the charm of the analog Instax process with the benefits of some digital tricks. I was fond of the various vintage effects, vignettes and colour filters, making various combinations to produce a result that I couldn't easily achieve on a Mini 11, and yet it still shared the style of those analog cameras. Now, I could personally live without the fisheye and light leak effects, but I enjoyed the mirror setting as well as the chance to capture 2 smaller images in one. And of course, unlike a fully analog Instax which makes a print every time you push the shutter, the EVO, like other digital cameras, lets you choose which images to print, as well as when to do it and to make copies of them too if you like. You may lose the element of surprise and uniqueness of a fully analog system as a result, but I personally feel the EVO is the best hybrid solution to date from Fujifilm. Plus again, you get the chance to wirelessly print images from your phone, whether they're fun photos from a party or an event, or something more serious taken with cameras, lenses or techniques that are beyond the capabilities of the EVO itself. I started my review with an open mind, but felt I'd inevitably conclude a wireless printer like the Mini Link would make more sense for most people, or that a digital hybrid would lack the charm and surprise of a fully analog Mini, and they're cheaper too. But once I'd started using the Mini EVO, I was won over by the effects and the physical controls, which I much preferred to the earlier LiPlay. It's a lot of fun to use, and I simply like the prints that it made, which ultimately is what a camera is all about. That said, if you only want to print from your phone, Fujifilm now sells wireless printers in each of its Instax formats from mini to wide, and I've got reviews of all of them here, as well as of all of the analog models if you want to keep it old school. So which would you prefer? Wireless phone printer, hybrid camera, or original analog? I'd love to hear from you in the comments, and as always, thanks for watching to the end of my review. If you've enjoyed it, please consider a like and a follow, and if you're shopping for the EVO or generously want to treat me to a coffee, there's links in the description and pinned comment. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.